Hi, I am Brian, curator of the Garden Path Tarot. The subject of this cast is about something that resurfaced recently for me, the Mandela effect. Coined by Fiona Broome, author and paranormal researcher, it describes memories that many people share incorrectly. In her experience, she recalled the death of Nelson Mandela as occurring in prison in the 1980s. Nelson Mandela passed this world on December 5th, 2013, after leaving prison and becoming South Africa's first post-apartheid president. For the sake of time, I'm not going to be reading the entire article that I'm referencing, but you can find details and a link in the description. Written by Jessica Andrews on August the 13th, 2020, and found on ourcommunitynow.com, titled Sinbad's Shazam, The Strange Case of a Movie That Doesn't Exist. I fell down this hole by accident. Or was it? I mean, after all, it doesn't seem like there's any such thing as coincidence anymore. I was actually working on an altogether different topic. I just couldn't ignore that it felt like a signal that this is what I should be doing. As I said, I was already familiar with the Mandela effect and its namesake example, but when perusing online content, my husband sent me this link to a Gaia commercial with additional examples that were unknown to me before this. I'm also going to see if I can find a link to that and leave that in the description as well. Anyway, another famous example that a lot of us are familiar with is that of the Berenstain Bears. And yes, I did say Berenstain Bears. I remembered it as Berenstein Bears. And I even remember that being a part of my education on the Mandela effect. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. And I just kind of took it in stride that I guess it's possible that a large collective of people could misremember the same thing. And not only that, that they were misremembering it the same way. Now, I realize that this is part of the trap that I have lived in all of these years. One of those traps where we dismiss things as insignificant or unimportant, when actually we're being duped. It's only now that I think I am capable of seeing the significance and inconsistencies between what I am being told is reality and what I remember or know to be true. At one time, I would have equated this with delusion and my natural need to find meaning and categorize everything, and additionally, there's my penchant for the paranormal. I now know this was just another way that the illusion that this world is keeps us from questioning too deeply. Forgive the upcoming cliche of the Matrix movie and the hero Neo. Consciousness is a finicky and mostly guessed at concept to this day. In this mythos, though, if you will, it is made known to Neo that the Matrix tried different themes for the enslaved human populace to keep them happy, compliant, and not questioning their reality. And if I remember correctly, they even tried versions where there was no disease, no want or suffering, but that I think this was stated as well, that the human populace was incapable of accepting that, and those versions failed. Neatly woven in, though, I thought, was the explanation of leftover programs that were cryptids, such as dragons, fairies, oracles, and specters from those failed versions. It was even mentioned, I believe by the oracle, that human consciousness has a memory of those previous versions, and those generational memories are carried forward even as the machines grew new humans for power sources. What does it say that the reality that worked best had to include suffering and adversity and all the hallmarks of the human experience as we know it? So this matrix had to write a reality where making a big deal over deja vu coincidence could mean the symptoms of a delusional mind were surfacing. That which might spiral into some kind of full blown psychosis from which we should fear that we cannot escape. If there is some intelligent force that somehow benefits from trapping us here in this existence, I see the sense in convincing the population that these are not any more than circumstance, not anything more than coincidence, because look too deeply and you begin to see that we're standing in some rig similar to Star Trek's holodecks. However, isn't that what is happening? Isn't that what we're finding is true at the quantum level? Spooky action at a distance and particles that make up our very existence behaving in a manner that moves according to our will. I'll get into that subject in the future, but for now, unseat what you believe you know to be true and try to hold in your mind that in these days, that crazy and extreme isn't so crazy anymore. Seriously, have you not thought to yourself that what is currently happening isn't at all like anything you could have imagined a year ago, 2 years ago? Now, I'm not making light of the miseries visited on us currently. I'm also too aware that I am still mostly treading water at best in the current state of this world. I have, thanks to the internet, been able to completely detach from narrow broadcast, bottlenecked sources of news and quote unquote fact. Mostly thanks to some apps, I am able to see sides of humanity that other apps up to present haven't been able to do. So, text and still photos, that base kind of social media, still kept me separated from the people that I wished to engage with. Some of the new apps, however, allow a short amount of time for you to get a video, and it conveys so much more. Back on topic though, as I watched the Gaia commercial, another example was covered, that of a 90s movie or television show where Sinbad played a bumbling comic genie, and that show was called Shazam. Now, stop, just wait. Did that not sound familiar to you? Sinbad as Shazam? It did to me as well, and the cognitive dissonance that grew from this had me immediately Googling this show that I was sure I had seen and remembered. But no, it never existed. That is where I stumbled across this article, and I sat in disbelief as the article further described this particular incident of the Mandela effect and kids that were roughly ages 10 through 15 during the late 80s and 90s. In the article, the author cites an interview with Shaquille O'Neal, who had starred as Kazam, and Shaquille O'Neal said that he would be glad to be in a comic crossover with Sinbad, quote unquote, for the kids. The problem here again with his altruistic gesture is that Sinbad never starred in any such role. Later in the article, we find tweets from Sinbad where he actually makes jokes that he hated the role and the performance so much he removed them from people's homes secretly in league with the government, and that mind control was used to change everyone's memories about it. And he went further and said that 3 copies still exist and he's sending agents to your home to get them. I remember this show. I do. I remember it clearly. Well, as clearly as anything that would have happened, in my early teenage years. But I remember the costume he wore, the turban. I remember the colors of the costume being red and purple and gold. I remember the 2 children that are mentioned in the article by other people, and their kids, those 2 kids, their wish that their dad could find love again. The author goes on to say, and I quote directly here, "People all across the nation have even expressed having detailed memories of when and where they watched this film as a kid. One man named Don worked at his uncle's movie rental store and specifically remembers buying the Shazam movie for the store. She, the author, she also mentions a testimony where a person said they have a bounty on Craigslist for $1,000 to go to any person who can provide them with a copy of this movie they're so certain did exist. Later, the author writes that on April Fool's 2017, the site College Humor even posted quote-unquote lost footage of the movie to poke fun at it all. They called it a joke, but then in the clip at the end, a little girl says, quote, "We have our memories. They're real. No one can take that from us," end quote. And finally, the article quotes the X-Files' Fox Mulder on this exact example from the show. Which, believe it or not, brings us back to how reality is defined, or maybe how reality is described is better. How can everyone's consciousness, how can everyone's memory actually be correct, even when they differ? Scientists are now telling us that we create our own reality. So is this how the multiverse works? How all dimensions exist in parallel and somewhat all overlapping one another? We seem to be in all places, all dimensions, or all universes at once. And by only turning slightly, we might slip into an alternate universe. There are also stories surfacing where individuals claim to be from places that can't be found on a map and, for all evidence, doesn't even appear to exist. People who tell us they remember things said or done in a certain way that others do not remember at all. We stall for a moment. We'll reflect on our memory, feel that cognitive dissonance rearing its head, and then the trap kicks in, and we tell ourselves not to think too much of it and move on. After all, we're stressed, we're tired, we've been through a lot, we're going through a lot. So for my sake, I typically would have chalked it up to perceptual error and forced myself not to think too much of it. The article went one step further to prove that even though it seems highly improbable that multiple people can misremember the same thing and also share in the exact detail those misremembered events, but that there's an explanation. The article gave another tweet from Sinbad, where he found, I guess based by a friend, that he did indeed host a marathon, a television marathon, dressed as a genie. There was a picture of this too. While I do remember that vaguely, I looked at the provided pic and I distinctly remember that the costume he wore for Shazam had purple, gold, and red. This isn't the same costume. Not to mention, it doesn't explain why I can remember the plot of a show the way so many others have said, that example of the kids wishing their father would find love again. We're all misremembering details of a plot in the same way about a show that never existed, much less the plot to the show. There's a story of North America's original inhabitants, our first people, a tribe that left practically no trace of themselves, and their disappearance has been called mysterious. These advanced people described finding a way to essentially vibrate themselves into another dimension. Another Earth, like this one, but one that has a different vibration or signature in existence. A theme I realized has actually been explored more often than I really thought of. If you're not familiar with the television show Fringe, which came out some while ago, give it a chance. And no, it's not Roberto Orci or J.J. Abrams' pinnacle of work, but they explore these exact subjects in an entertaining way. I also remember an old Tales from the Dark Side, where the main character finds himself in a world that changes through the episode, where people are beginning to speak a completely different language. It was as though he too shifted into a neighboring universe. Similar, but yet in this case, in the end of the episode ended up being drastically different. If you were a fan of from the Dark Side, it might ring a bell if I told you that he first notices the discrepancies when his wife calls his son lunch for school dinosaur. And everyone in his world that day uses dinosaur to mean what he knows is as lunch. I realize that although I thought I should be working on my content for a series in which I mean to outline what this awakening is and what is occurring at the same time, as so much upheaval, death, and despair grips our world. But I realized this was my environment telling me precisely how to start on a subject that is as far-reaching, vivid, and unexplored as any place to travel on this planet, and that the Mandela effect was the precise introduction to the very subject I wish to discuss. It's consciousness. Consciousness that is changing in our world in a way that seems so improbable that you find all this information typically just in metaphysics. Yet, we see time after time that sources like the Vedas, the Quran, the Talmud, the books of the dead, are all suddenly found explained by branches of modern science, especially that of the quantum level. I gotta tell you, science owes Meta an apology. Please also know that I am not trying to capitalize on the misery and the plight of others in order to swoop in with another apocalyptic theory of our world in order to sell you bug-out kits or the how-to book on prepping. It's quite the opposite. I'm here to discover how I can be part of ending all of that, how I can help others in this awakening. I don't know about any of you that may have identified with these recent weirdnesses in life that are happening. And by that, I mean that if you've listened this far, you obviously had a what moment of incredulity where I pointed something out and it dawned on you that you know precisely what I'm talking about. And what might blow your freaking mind a second after that is how you did indeed dismiss whatever that was at the time. And then your mind could be blown that you've realized, in a way, that you experienced an almost complete amnesia about it. You didn't forget it. You're not misremembering it. It's like you just can't suddenly understand how you carelessly said, meh, not important, and tossed the event in the mental trash. I feel more now than ever tied to the consciousness of the rest of the world. Likely you have too. For some of you, this may have been assistance of any kind made available when it was needed. This is always a sure sign that you are precisely where you need to be, doing what you need to be doing. A very good friend of mine told me way before I was ready to understand what she was saying that all things are as they should be all of the time. This statement really has me spinning. This was in response at the time to my urgency to find meaning and purpose and, apply those to my experience. Years it took me to get this. And then this year said, slam. Now, in this particular cast and in future casts, you'll find that I use fictional elements as analogy and metaphor to explain concepts that might otherwise be impossible to explain in, I guess you could call it, normal human conversation. The times when you're attempting to explain an epiphany and the experience goes beyond language and instead seems to be recorded for us in sound and recorded in smell and emotion. So you're all going to have to get over the fact that I will always use fictional elements from pop fiction sources in order to bring you a, I hope, complete understanding that without those fictional literary devices, The concepts that I'm speaking of would make no sense at all, or likely take me forever to describe it until I felt I was getting that, oh, I get it. So, also, you may not know me, likely. So, sometimes confidence or curiosity could cause others to hear or see ego and the self being emphasized. But I promise you that I never want to come from that place. I want to be here for any of you. I still don't know what direction this will all take me, but if I can help in some way, I want to. It's easy to write these occurrences off as nothing to dig deeper for. We have more important things to worry over after all. This wasn't a tangent or a distraction from what I should be doing by making other content. This was the universe telling me, here, this way, do it like this. Some of you may have noticed that some things are happening where you feel so sure about the impression that you're being given, or that you find yourself not able to dismiss these things happening as easily as you once did. You're likely also to notice that more and more people around you are not at all seeing things the way you do, feeling things the way you do, or even having thoughts that seem so blatantly obvious that to you, but to another person, it's as though they're living in another reality. Yes, this sounds like a symptom that we're told about, where delusions and those who believe them will often be pointing out things that cannot be proven nor denied. And those are typically considered something like a logic trap that the quote unquote insane use as reasoning to prove their delusions. Yeah, no, that's not what's happening to you. Don't get me wrong. I still don't think I have a firm grasp on what it means to function with all of these new sensations opening up to me. I still find myself questioning my reason and the ability to be rational and also spiritual. I find myself going over to the spiritual finally, though. That I gotta say is different too. I have hit a similar spiritual point like this in my life where all kinds of synchronicities were happening, and I thought, yay, I'm on the way to Avalon. I am finally on my path to enlightenment, only to hit a dead wall. I have already hit that wall recently during this year's awakening, but it instantly felt like the smallest thing in the world to look back at the obstacle and go, nah, you ain't done me in. Just a year ago, that event would have been an ego-crushing thing to happen. In times past, this wall would also have me experiencing existential angst or despair because something came along and told me, that wasn't real. You're imagining things. That's not how it really happened. You're delusional to believe what you do. It didn't carry significance. That event didn't have meaning. All this doesn't mean that I understand the event any more than I did before, only that I am finally grounded to a point where it doesn't matter. People talk about this all the time to me, a growing pain, common to everyone, that bubbles are burst, and fantasies end up being just that, fantasies. Just because a thing cannot be explained doesn't mean it isn't real. Just because you won't ever fit it into a box doesn't mean that it didn't happen, or also doesn't mean that it didn't have importance. You and I, all of us, we are not our thoughts, and we are most certainly not just our physical shells. This from the modern sage Sadhguru, paraphrased. We're not even this time period. Just like I am not my car, I am not my home, I am not my family, or I'm not even the identity that I have been called by all my life, known as Brian. I am more than this. Just because I cannot give you empirical evidence of this awakening, what it is, what it means, where it might lead to, none of that matters. You only need to ask yourself if what I am saying resonates with you. Even with your conscious, ego, rational oriented self, some part of you made it this far because you know it to be true. My experience or experiences will not always be similar to yours, and truths for me are just those truths for me. I'm not encouraging more solipsistic thinking in the world, but it is true that you and I, all of us, every single moment that passes, and our consciousness is recording it, we are all creating our very own universes. I really thank you for making it this far. I hope to create more content like this, and if you liked what you heard, let me know with a like or comment. As I said, I am as without a map on all of this as most of us probably are, so I'm open to suggestions. Leave those in the comments, and I'd like to wish you all light, love, safety, and peace for all of us. I've been your host, Brian, on the Garden Path to Row.